Layers, layers, layers. In my mind, there are three major advantages that working digitally has over working traditionally. You can paint with all the colors of the wind, yeah! Without having to worry about mixing paints or running out of paints or trying to match exact colors from a dried swatch of paint to a wet thing of paint. It can be a pain in the ass. Advantage number two, you get to work as big as you want. Depending, of course, on the processing power of your computer, but you don't have to build some kind of crazy scaffolding and get on top of it and, be afraid you're gonna fall off while you're painting something big. You could just make it as big or as small as you want. And finally, what we are about to explore today layers. To me, working with layers gives you so much more flexibility than a traditional workflow. It allows you to kind of screw up things and restart and reposition things without having to kind of come up with weird real life hacks and cuttings and papers and things like that. Not to say that one is better than the other, but for me, when I'm working for clients and I need to make quick changes, having the ability to manipulate layers is super helpful. So this is intended for beginners, people who are kind of dabbling their toes into the digital space and maybe want to kind of extend their capabilities. So this is going to be a basic overview for beginners. If you already use layers and you're like a layer ninja expert, you can ignore this, but please still subscribe because I'm working on building my channel. If you like watching people draw cute little monsters, maybe stick around for that if you already know everything you need to know about layers. And here we go. Welcome to screen grab mode. Okay, I'm gonna be covering 6 basic topics and I'm gonna try to keep it as generic as possible because even though I'm working in Photoshop, most of the drawing programs that you are gonna be dealing with will have similar features at least when it comes to talking about layers and using layers. I'm going to do a general overview of layers and how they work. We're going to talk about opacity. We're going to talk about locking transparency. We're going to talk about selecting pixels. We're going to talk about clipping masks, and we're going to talk about blend modes. And most of the drawing programs that you encounter will have similar functions. So let's get started. All right, so the layer palette in Photoshop is all the way over here on the right. Most programs have it all the way here on the right just because Photoshop did it, so everyone else is doing it. That's not always the case. Sketchbook Pro has this floating menu that you can put it anywhere and then access it, but whatever. Here are the layers. Right now, I don't have anything set. It's just the background layer. So you can draw on it like you would. This is just like a piece of paper. And you can do everything that you want to. So I mean, y'all work with paper. You know what I'm talking about. If you want to change colors, you can do that, but you'll be drawing on top of what's already there. Or if you're very careful about filling in the lines, I guess you could use the bucket tool, but you can't really move this shape or alter it or resize it or anything like that. So it's like working on paper. So let us unlock the potential of layers. Normally when I start a piece, whether it's a character design or a comic or a painting, I create a new layer and I will call it sketch because I usually have an under sketch as a base for me to do all my other stuff. Please label your layers. Name them something important to you or name them something that you'll recognize. It doesn't matter if you are only ever going to be freelancing and you're the only person who is ever going to touch your files. Please label your stuff. Nothing sucks more than opening a piece that you worked on years ago and you want to retouch it or try something new and you open it up and all you see are these random numbers like layer 51, layer 375, and then you have to go through each and every layer, turning them on and turning them off to figure out what the fuck you were doing. So please, label your stuff. Label it something that you'll remember. Just fucking label your shit. Okay. All right. So sketch layer. Sometimes I use a blue color. Sometimes I use a gray color. I'm using like a basic sketch brush. I'm not going to talk about brushes. You can ask me about brushes and I'll tell you what brushes I'm using in the comments and all that kind of stuff, but this is not a brush discussion. All right, so let's just start with something fun. I usually like to draw cute little monsters. So let's see what this dude has got going on. All right, I don't like the pose that much, but you know, we got some weight going on here. And there's some interesting stuff going on here. It's kind of got his weight forward a little bit, so. A little thumb here, a little bit of a fist, maybe like a, and gotta give him like little cutie horns and maybe resize it. All right, so, oh, I accidentally hit the D key. In Photoshop, D resets your colors to black and white. So let me just quickly change that back to gray. Okay. All right, so basic sketch layer. This is kind of how messy it looks, at least when I do this kind of stuff. Usually I have like crossbars and stuff like that, so this is helpful for me to see what I'm doing. Layers, pretty simply, you can turn them on, you can turn them off. If I want to do a pencil, or if I want to ink over this now, what I can do is create another layer, and I will call that ink. And I will grab a inking brush, and then I will go in and I will start adding the darkness to my little dude. Hello, little dude. Usually when I do these monster cuties, there's like a weird skull going around. Like it's a little skull. It's a cutie monster embedded in this gross looking skull, but you know, that usually takes a lot more time. So I just wanted to kind of do this quick little dude so I can demonstrate the power of layers. Also, by drawing monsters, I don't have to worry about my anatomy. I can just draw whatever the hell I want. And I don't have to worry about people going, that doesn't look right. Okay, so pretty simple. Pretty standard comic workflow. So that's nice and all. But because it's on its separate layer, we can turn it off and we can go in and add more details if we feel like it. Like this isn't actually the inking brush that I like. I like to use this one, but it's not a brush session. We'll talk about brushes later. Maybe some lines here, more lines over here. Also, I have a very loud mechanical keyboard, so if you hear a lot of hacking on it, that's why. Sorry. All right, now that I have my inking layer, so sketch layer, ink layer, you can turn them on and off. Another fun thing to do, we can add in a color layer. So what I did was I selected the, let me go slower because this is basic. Okay, so I want my colors to be under my inks. So what I did is I selected the layer below my inks and I added a new layer. And so that adds it right underneath the ink layer. And now I'm going to rename this colors. And now I'm going to color this in. La, 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 la. And I'm going to be very sloppy. Because this is not a coloring tutorial, so I don't really care. I just want to show you how we unleash the power of layers without getting too fancy. Hopefully you do not color outside the lines like I did, but you know, whatever. We'll just call it, stylized monster. There we go. Oh, and I should probably put in a background gray or something so I don't burn out your eyes while you're watching this. There you go. All right, so usually have the white here for the eyes and maybe like like an old bone color for the horns. And save often. Photoshop is a memory hog, so save often. Boom. Okay, so basic layers. Sketch layer, color layer, ink layer. We can turn them on, we can turn them off. And oops. Yeah, we can turn them on, we can turn them off. If we're very fun, we can move them if we want to. If you need to reposition something, you can do that. If you want to add to a composition, you can select two layers or select multiple layers and then move them that way, and then resize them if you want, and then fix your composition that way. So, but layers are very powerful. Even just this basic stuff, without getting into anything terribly fancy, we can do a whole lot with just turning them on, turning them off, and moving them. Oops, moving them. All right. Next thing we're going to talk about is opacity. So, and we're going to put it in the context of an illustration so you can see how we can use opacity, but you'll figure it out. It's pretty easy stuff. In Photoshop, right up here, you have a slider called opacity. You can either type in a value, so let's call this 60, and you can see the blue gets less blue. So the opacity is going down. Back to 100, it's very blue. The effect is easier to see if I turn off the background layer. So if I turn off the background layer and we zoom in, this is what it looks like at 70 opacity. You can see more of the background showing through. So this would be like a transparent marker on a transparency, or if you're painting with like candy colors, if you're into customizing like a transparent blue or something like that. You know, we can take it down to 20% and we can bring it back all the way up to 100%. And opacity is a great way to overall tone something. So if I wanted to change the tone of this illustration, I could let's grab like a purple, and while I was grabbing a purple, I created a new layer. So what we're going to do is create a new layer on top, and we're going to fill that with purple, and we're going to call this tone layer. And we're going to take this opacity. So you can type in the value or in the opacity, or you can hit this arrow and use the slider here. And you can use the slider to go up and down and up and down. So you can very easily use this to tone an overall piece. So if you finish your illustration and you realize you want to give it a different mood, you can fill a layer with a happy color like a purple and just dial in the opacity you want, and if you want to get really fancy, you can then use an eraser in your toning layer and erase parts out so you can, get some neat effects that way. Look at that. You can get real experimental, you can do these kind of things. So playing with opacity for overall toning a piece is pretty fun. We're just gonna get rid of the tone layer. Another thing that you can do is use a shadow layer above your colors. So if you do stuff like anime style where you have hard cut shadows, using opacity with a layer is really fun. So I just created a new layer. We're gonna call this shadows. Now, a lot of times when people just start using digital coloring, they use black as a tone to create shadows, and that's not always the best. It kind of makes your shadows look drab and muddy, and your piece kind of looks sickly. So I try to use a warmer color like a deep purple or something like that when I'm doing shadow conditions and things like that. So I am going to grab a dark purple or a deep purple. I'm gonna remember to turn on my marker and just go extreme, put in these hard cut shadows. Go Mike Mignola on this guy. Very dramatic, very dramatic. And I'm outside the lines because I'm being sloppy. But it's a style, guys. It's a style. It's not because I'm rushing or anything. Let's be super dramatic. This isn't dramatic enough. Let's be ultra dramatic. Yes, fam. This is the most dramatic. If you want to make your character look super dramatic, you put a shadow all over that character's face, and you use that rim light to kind of erasing that rim light. You can also use shadows to kind of add in more detail if you want to emphasize certain parts of the anatomy. Oops, what am I doing? Here we go. Yeah, drama. All right, so now you can play with the opacity. Turn it down. This gives it a nice little warm shadow here. You can make it as subtle. You can go really subtle, or it can be very dramatic. But this opacity slider gives you a lot of flexibility. So there you go. Some ideas on how to use the opacity for great drama. Now it is time to lock transparency. And this is a fun technique for line art because it allows you to color the line art. Let's just get into it. So there's a menu right above the layers over here in Photoshop, and it's called lock. This will look different across different art programs. I like the implementations in some of them better. I think the way Clip Studio has it set up makes it a lot more easy to understand what the hell you're doing. But for now, we're only concerned with this first box right here. So let's say I want to color the line art. It's black right now, but I think it would look more fun if it was like a darker blue or something like that. So, I'll swipe that base blue, put in a little bit more. Now, without transparency lock clicked, if I try to color this line art as is, I have to be very careful with my pressure. I can't go outside the lines. And if you zoom in really quickly, you see I'm all over the place. I'm out here. I'm not quite, you know, doing the entire black line. If I wanted to do it without touching the lock transparency, I should have just inked it in blue. That's not what I did. So if you turn on this first button, this is the only button we care about. Don't touch the rest of this stuff because not every program has that. We only care about locking our transparency. So if I click that, now when I go in to color the line art, I stay within the lines. It's amazing. Whee! And maybe this blue could be a little bit more blue. Add in some of that. Oh, that's nice. There we go. That's fun. No, that's not fun. Let's see. Decisions. Okay, there we go. That's better. No, not quite there. Maybe dial down the saturation. Yes, okay, that's what I want. All right, so color in the line art. If you saw the Disney princesses as Power Rangers stuff, I kind of use this technique to erase the outlines. So if I want this outline to disappear, I just swatch this color, and then I can do that kind of thing. So for an animated style, locking transparency on the line art layer gives you a lot of options. So that's pretty cool. Let's grab that. Let's give the horns a little bit of brown here. And always safe. There you go. Locking transparency is also good if you want to do some complex rendering. So let's hide some stuff. Let's see. I'm going to I'm going to create a base shape here. What color am I going to use? I'm going to color bright color just because it's easier. So we're going to create a base shape here. Just a vague skull looking thing. And let's create another shape over top of it. So we'll call this helm thing. And we'll just kind of scoot that in there. So if you're going for a painterly style, but you still want separation between pieces, what I normally do is I would have line art above this and then black out the shapes that I want to be separated, and then turn on the transparency lock, and then go back to each of these shapes individually and start rendering. So like we'll use this. For this, I would do something like render in some shadows, put that in here. Use the blender, which I don't remember what blender I have on. Oh, okay, I have this one. All right, so use the blender, kind of soften up the edges, do that sort of thing. Carve in more detail, add in highlights. And this is terrible. I'm very sorry that this is so awful, but we're gonna he doesn't know what he's talking about. He can't draw. And then, carve in some details on the top. Kind of looks like a military Lego person. Okay. So that's another great way to use the locking transparency, creating basic shapes to block out your forms, and then carving in with details with, your painterly brushes and all that kind of stuff. This is a terrible example, but, hopefully you get the idea. All right, we're gonna delete these dudes. And we're going to create 3 new layers, and we'll call this Y, G, B, and we're gonna use, what did I grab? Okay, we're gonna use this, and we're gonna create a Venn diagram while we talk about selecting pixels. Why would you want to do this? I don't know, but I will show you ways you can use it. So where's the G? There's the G. And then there's the B. I'm going to select the yellow layer, and you see this little thumbnail image of the layer here. This thumbnail tells you everything that's in this layer. If I start drawing over here, you know, that blue mark shows up in the corner. So you want to make sure you're hovering over this thumbnail. Over here, over on the name, you're going to get different stuff. So right click here and scroll down to select pixels. So if I right click over on the name section, I get all this other shit that I don't want. We're going to talk about this in the next section, but for here, just stick within here. All right, so I've selected the yellow shape. Now you'll see these marching ants. I call them marching ants. I don't know what the technical Adobe name for them is, but I call them marching ants. And this creates a selection out of whatever is in that layer. So if I go down to the colors of the monster, even though the layer is turned off, I can still do the same thing. I can right click over there and select pixels, and now there's a monster shape. Marching ants. So back to the yellow, go back to select pixels. Okay, so because these marching ants are my selection, it prevents me from drawing outside of the line. So like I can't go outside of the line. This is cool because now I've isolated this part all across any layer that I select. So if I grab the green layer and I use a red, oops. Well, okay, if I use a red right now, I color in all of that selected area where the marching ants are. But if I lock the transparency on the green layer, I get part of a Venn diagram, and then I can do the same thing with blue up here. So we get this nice Venn diagram. If I select the green layer, the G layer, and I right click in that little thumbnail, I have a couple of different options. We're gonna first add transparency mask. So add. And what that does is it adds the marching ants from this layer to the one that you have already selected. So this gives me, now I can paint within the green shape and the yellow shape. So it'll affect up here, or if I create a new layer and I turn all these off so you can see the marching ants, and then I can just fill that. So that's what that does. All right, so if I select the B layer and I right click within here, you'll see subtract. So we'll go to subtract. And what that does is it subtracts this shape from the previous two. So turning that off, this is what that looks like right now. So I have all those selected, and then if I right click one more time, I'm going to go back down to the yellow layer, right click, intersect. This will take the full selection and intersect it with whatever is selectable on that layer. I'm not explaining it well, but I'll just show you. Okay, so intersect, boom. So now we're isolated to the yellow layer, but because we already subtracted the blue layer off, this is what we get in our final selection. Okay, so obviously this is great for creating Venn diagrams, but what else can we do with this technique? Let's pretend that he has a different color for his belly. So to do that, I can either draw it on here directly, which is probably the easiest way to do it, honestly. Or I can create create a new layer and we'll call this the belly shade. Belly shade, there we go. And right click inside the thumbnail for the monster colors, select pixels. So now I've isolated the whole thing, and then I can just draw in my belly shade here. Let's do that there. Oop, I forgot, that won't work. Okay, all right, belly shade. Okay, now we have our shadows, and that looks pretty good. Honestly, I would have just probably drawn it on this base color layer, but I'm showing you what it does. So I don't use it often because of the next technique that we are going to talk about. So I have been using Photoshop for at least 10 years before I discovered this technique, and it made me feel like such an idiot. So hopefully you will not feel like an idiot and you will learn now instead of 10 years from now. Okay, so instead of using select pixels and then drawing that in and then moving on to something else and then having to go back in if I want to add something else and select pixels once again, like if I wanted to create armbands or something like that. What I would do is I would use a clipping mask. So let's get rid of this body part down there. So to create a clipping mask, we're going to right click over the name section, not the thumbnail section, the name section. I don't know how this function works offhand in other drawing programs, but I know most of them have a clipping mask function. Now, if you're a traditional artist, this is a little bit strange because normally when you mask something, you mask out all the negative part that you don't want to use, and then you can paint in the positive part. Clipping mask isolates things to the positive part and ignores the negative part. So hopefully that made sense. I'm gesturing a lot, but I realize you can't see that because it's not face cam right now. All right, so to isolate the area, if I want to draw in like the belly thing again and the arm thing again and maybe some other details, I can either do that on this layer, but I kind of like doing those kind of decorations and details on a clipping mask because it gives me more flexibility. I can change the opacity, I can change the blend mode, which is the last thing we'll talk about. But it just gives me more flexibility when I want to do little details like that. So to do clipping mask, pretty easy. Create a new layer. We're gonna call this decorations. Right click over the name area and go down to create clipping mask. And you'll see this nice little arrow that's pointing directly down to the layer below it. So now if I draw on this layer, my strokes will be isolated to what's below it. Now, if I turn clipping mask off, turn clipping mask off, release clipping mask, you can see all the stuff that I drew outside the lines. So let's turn that back on, create clipping mask, and let's erase that because that looks like Bobo. And draw in our decorations. Maybe he's got like, or maybe she's got white palms or something like that. And I kind of liked the armband thing, so I'm gonna go with that still. So clipping masks, very easy to implement, very powerful. I like clipping masks better than selections because selections you usually have to turn off to go to another part of your piece and then reselect and then try to remember what layer you were selecting. With clipping masks, you can just do that. If I want to add another clipping mask, there's two ways to do it. The easy way is to select the base layer and create another layer, and boom, your new layer is already in this stack. The less easy way to do it is if you're on the layer that's already in the clipping mask, hit create layer, you'll see that it's not within this stack, so you have to go right click and create clipping mask and put it back in the stack. Clipping masks are a lot of fun, and they give you a lot of flexibility if you want to, you know, play around. If you're not sure with what your final composition is going to be or your final piece is going to be, you can. They act like regular layers. You know, you can mess with the opacity, do that kind of stuff. Like if you wanted to be fancy with the inks, you could put. Let's call this a gradient. You know, you could do something silly like. Here we go. Put a gradient on this sucker and watch how bad it is. Wonk. You know? And then maybe turn down the blend so it's a little bit more subtle. You can add in like some fake lighting effects that way. It does not look good with the shadow turned on. Oh, and the other nice thing is, remember how our shadow was just kind of sloppily put in there? Well, now if I add that to the clipping mask, boom, it's much more clean. So there you go. Clipping masks are so useful and so powerful. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is blend modes, and that's what's hidden in this pop-out over here. Right now it's on normal. I use blend modes a lot when I'm creating shadows. If I'm doing harsh shadows like this, or if I'm doing softer shadows, like if I wanted this to be much more soft, you know, I could blend out the edges and make it much more subtle. But I love using blending modes to kind of get different effects. So I'm going to lock transparency, turn this all the way up. So I think I'm going to use a less saturated purple. Here we go. Put that in there. My favorite blend mode for shadows is multiply. So you hit on this menu. As you scroll down this list, it'll kind of do a live preview. So you can kind of quickly get an overview of different effects. And you can play with this and you can stack these layers and get lots of crazy stuff going on. So here, I'll just stick with the basic multiply. And I'll turn that down a little bit because we're kind of losing the line art there. So we'll kind of do that kind of stuff. And actually, you know what? This gradient I like here, but I'm going to use that to tone the overall piece. So I'm going to release the clipping mask. And I'm going to turn that opacity all the way up. And then I'm going to use something like soft light. Gives you a very subtle effect, or overlay. I kind of like the overlay. And I can tone this down just a little bit. Kind of change the mood of the piece. So blending modes is when you can have a lot of fun. You can get really crazy with stuff. Another thing I like to do sometimes to help pop out a shape or to add dimension to a cartoony piece like this is to add secondary lighting, bounce lighting. So I'll create, let's see, a bounce layer, bounce. And usually bounce light is a blue. We already have a blue guy here, so see, I'll just use this guy. Let's try blue anyway, screw it. All right, so, you know, I'll put in a blue bounce over here, and then like in the groinal area. It doesn't look like anything right now because I haven't turned on the blend mode that I'm looking at. And then something like this. Like this and like this, and then we'll smudge the edges so we get this nice little glow effect. And then we'll go grab screen or color dodge. Color dodge is a little too intense. Overlay sometimes works for the bounce light. I usually choose screen and then drill that down, because this is intended to be a subtle effect. And then I'll do like a rim light, so rim. And for that, I usually use like an orangish something, and then I'll just paint in the, whoops, where are we? There we go. I'll paint in the rim, make it a little bit more thinner here. Painting the rim. And then rims I usually do color dodge. There's two types of color dodge. Sometimes one works better than the other. But this one, the regular color dodge, seems to work out pretty well. Let me get rid of this here. And so if we zoom out, that's looking pretty nice. Oops. It's pretty nice for really quick sketch. You know, if you want to put in some highlights, make it look like it's a shiny little monster. You know, and soften that up a little bit. I didn't used to use the smudge tool that much, but I've been finding more and more uses for it, so that's kind of interesting. Not to get sidetracked, but there you go. Okay, so blend modes. Use them, abuse them. It's great to add textures to a piece. If you find stock photos of interesting textures, you can stick them in a layer and then use a blend mode and then dial down the opacity, because you don't want the texture to be too blatant. Otherwise it'll look photoshoppy and digital and fake and stuff. You kind of want to have a little bit of subtle texture. So there you go, fun with blend layers. Oh, I guess we can create a ground shadow to kind of ground our little dude, because right now she looks like she's floating. So let's see here. Let's try this. And multiply and dial it down. And put that in there. Maybe bring back our friend the gradient just a bit. I kind of like what that's doing. Kind of like that. All right, so you can see you can spend hours and hours fiddling with the piece once you're done. But I highly recommend experimentation with these blend modes because it's fun and you can do a lot more stuff with them than you can with just pencil and paper. Go have fun, experiment. That's what it's all about. You can do that because it's digital and doesn't hurt anybody. All right, bye. So I feel like that's a pretty good overview of layer basics. If you have any questions, please drop them down in the comment section of wherever you find this video. I kind of monitor all the places where I post it. And if you have suggestions for future videos or other things you'd like me to cover, please don't hesitate to suggest them. I will take them under advisement and see if I can figure out an interesting way to film it. Thanks for sticking around. I know it was a really long video. Some people really like the long videos, some people like the shorter videos. So I'm working it out, but I think I'll be doing ranty type things on Tuesday, or filming ranty type things on Tuesday for publishing on Wednesday, and then filming longer form stuff Thursday and Friday and editing it on Friday and then like uploading it later on Friday. Not sure quite what my schedule can accommodate, but that's working out so far so good. So if you enjoy my channel, please subscribe and share with your friends and do all the YouTube things because I'm trying to build this sucker. All right, thanks for watching and I'll check you next time. Bye.